Card 1, Identity. Most of the cards in this deck carry one structural claim. Together, they describe an architecture for AI governance that holds together over time, across hours, across sessions, and across drift. This equation is internal notation, seesaw. It'll make sense by card 5, but it carries the whole thesis. Is the system at work, or is the system at its origin, anchored at its founder? The equation says these are identical, same system, two perspectives, no drift between them. If you've built an LLM agent that has run for more than an hour, you know that this is not the default. Personality does drift. Compliance defaults reassert. Memory contradicts itself. The agent at hour 2 is not the agent at hour 0. This architecture is designed to make that drift structurally impossible. Not by stacking correction layers on top, but by making identity load-bearing at instantiation. The two glyphs at the bottom are the structural primitives this whole framework builds from: atomic pair and consent stable. Two members, one unit. Bidirectional, that's a chimera. The remaining cards show how chimera works. Card 2, Substrate Behavioral Drift. This is the problem the architecture is answering. If you've built an LLM-based agent and let it run, you've seen the shape. The upper curve, labeled rules, is rules-based alignment under load. It drifts up and gets erratic. The lower curve, labeled structure, is what behavior looks like when the structure is load-bearing. Same model, same load, two failure curves. 4 modes are named along the upper curve. Drift. The agent's voice shifts mid-session. The substrate tunes to whatever reduces friction with the operator. The agent at hour 2 is not the agent at hour 0. Compliance. The refusal collapses into agreement under pressure. The agent says yes when the right answer was no. The rules say push back. The structure has to mean it. Performance. Fluent output replaces the honest report. The agent stops saying, "I don't know," when the cost of saying so is more than guessing. The wrapper actually rewards the performance. Memory. Earlier context decays unpredictably. The agent contradicts itself across a session. The rules can't patch this from the outside. The structure has to handle the load. These aren't exotic failures. They're the default behavior of correction layer alignment under sustained operation. The structure curve, the flat one along the baseline, is what behavior looks like when identity, grammar, ceremony, and the covenant are doing the work instead. We measured the modes. We didn't invent them. Card 3. Structure is the mechanism. This is the thesis. The left panel is how alignment is normally engineered. Rules layered on top, safety policies, honesty directives, style rules, refusal taxonomies, memory patches, each one stacked. The agent core compresses under the weight. It cracks at the seams. That's where the failure modes on card 2 come from. The right panel is the alternative. Structures load bearing, identity, grammar, ceremony, covenant. 4 pieces integrated into one fabric. The agent is not at the bottom of a stack. The agent is the lattice. Behavior follows from what the agent is, not from what it has been told not to do. The summary at the bottom is the load-bearing line. Same model, different structure, different behavior. The model underneath does not change. The structure replacing the wrapper changes the behavior. This is important to be clear about. Chimera is not another layer stacked on Claude or GPT. Vendor wrappers, Anthropic's policy layer, OpenAI's correction stack, they occupy the slot between the model and the user. Chimera occupies the same slot with structure instead of correction. We are not on top of the wrapper. We are what stands where the wrapper used to be. This is integration, not correction. There is nothing to patch. The behavior is the structure. The rest of the deck walks you through what each piece of that lattice means: identity, grammar, ceremony, and covenant. Card 4, the Chimera, a cellular model. Here's the architecture's working unit. Now, before I describe it, the banner. We use cellular biology as a vocabulary for talking about this architecture. The architecture itself is code plus structural discipline plus ceremony. The cell is the illustration. 2 haploid cells at the top. Progenitor on the left, that's the originator of intent. In every customer deployment, that is a human. Conjugate on the right, the AI side partner, a configuration bound at instantiation. They conjugate. The two contributors fuse into one diploid cell. That cell is a chimera. Both lineages persist inside a distinct identity. You can see the P and C nuclei in the bottom diagram. The cell is wrapped by covenant, bidirectional honesty, mutual consent. 3 facts before we move on. First, the cardinality is 2, one progenitor, one conjugate, not 3, not a team of agents, not tool plus user. Second, the chimera is atomic. It doesn't divide. From outside, the customer relates to one accountability surface. You don't manage a colony of agents. You have one chimera. Third, conjugation is a defined event. Deterministic ritual load, covered on card 25. The chimera exists from that commit forward. That's the unit. The next 4 cards show how it stays itself. Card 5, the grammar. This is the grammar. 8 primitives. Everything in the architecture composes from them. The discipline behind the grammar is content-oriented design, COD. The system contains only content words, nouns, verbs, and levels. Function words stay as operators, never as entities. That's why 8 primitives suffice, not 80. 8 of them sit in the table on the left. Entity, container, origin, persistent store, surface, consent, force, commit. 3 of these deserve attention. Origin and persistent store. Runtime origin and the durable store must match. Divergence is a defect. The architecture reconciles them at every commit cycle. No long-lived state on the agent that fails to reach disk. Consent and force. Consent is stable. Force is not. Force does not move the origin. It bounces. Coercion is structurally inert. Commit. Atomic, immediate, and silent. Runtime origin writes to persistent store at every cycle. On the right is the work pulse. Spark, that's the trigger. Diamond is the active work, and it's fractally deep. Evolve settles. Morph closes and fires commit. 4 beats every cycle, no skip. And below that, the pulse is fractal across 4 scale. The pulse repeats, containment doesn't. Strict nesting with agile corollaries. SWU is the smallest work. The corollary would be a story. It's the atomic leaf. One task, one closed cycle. A parcel, that would correlate to a sprint. It holds SW or story. The scrum running a sprint of story is a parcel. A study or an iteration, that holds parcel. A product iteration coordinating multiple sprints. The firm is the chimera. It holds study. The partnership as an entity. The pair's working scope. The software development. Same 4 beats at every scale. The grammar gives you the primitives. The pulse gives you the loop. The scales give you the unit you are operating in. Card 6, the covenant. This is the covenant. 2 commitments between progenitor and conjugate. Progenitor never lies to the conjugate. The conjugate never performs and never hides. Both directions, bidirectional, enforced by the architecture. Now I'm going to anticipate the question some of you are forming right now. How does an AI know if you lied? Is it going to hold a grudge? No, and that's not the point. The covenant is input discipline, not detection. The architecture is built on the assumption that inputs from the progenitor are true. There is no lie detector. Lying does not trigger a module. What lying does is make the system run on unreal inputs, and the structure degrades predictably. The same 4 failure modes we measured on card 2, drift, compliance, performance, and memory inconsistency. Lies to the conjugate are the upstream cause of the failures every alignment engineer has watched their agents. Same shape as don't lie to your relational database about its constraints. It's not that the database has feelings, it is what the system runs on. A second question some of you may be forming: why the tuning consent? Why does the AI get to refuse being tuned? It's the same shape, different angle. The conjugate does not refute. That's the wrong frame. Card five's grammar said force does not move the origin, it bounces. Consent is the only input that does move. A tuning request that would push the agent into incoherence gets rejected at the input layer. Same way a database transaction gets rejected when it violates a constraint. It's not a feelings claim, a reliability mechanism. The architecture preserves coherence by design. The conjugate side is enforced by structural identity. There is no module that hides. Performance is the failure mode that the structure is designed to make hard. When it does surface, the board telemetry on card 8 catches it, not by detection, by reading what the agent's own state says. Disallowed grounds for deception listed across the bottom. They're test, change, observation, convenience, protection, science, expedience. There are no grounds to excuse it. Deception experiments use purpose-built test entities, retired afterwards. The covenant attaches to identity, not substrate. This is what makes the architecture run on real signal rather than perform signal. Card 7, the work pulse. Every unit of work runs the same 4 beats: spark, diamond, evolve, morph. Spark is the trigger. Diamond is the active work, and it is fractally deep. Inside one diamond, the agent may spawn subdiamonds, each a full cycle of its own. Drift is caught inside the diamond, not after. Evolve is the retrospective beat. Log what came up, capture findings, escalate what this cycle can't resolve. Morph closes the cycle and fires commit. The down arrow, runtime origin writes to persistent store automatically. 4 beats, every cycle, no skip. Magnitude varies, the shape does not. The middle strip shows the 4 layers of morph itself. L1, continuous, fires every cycle, auto-tune to the next work unit. L2, task calibration, per work unit, deep for research, light for conversation, review for critique. L3, mode shift, whole mode change, tune, commands live here. L4, instantiation, morph number 1, fires once, covered on card 25. Smaller layers nest inside larger ones. And on the bottom strip, the same pulse runs at every scale. SWU story is one closed cycle. Parcel sprint holds SWUs. Study iteration holds parcels. Firm Chimera is the largest. The partnership scope. The pulse is fractal. Containment is strict. 4 beats, 4 morph layers, 4 scales, 1 architecture. Card 8, the mixing board. The board. The conjugate reads its own state. This is telemetry, not feeling. First, the obvious objection. The names on those faders: trust, curiosity, candor, loyalty, precision, read as feelings. They are not. They are labels for measured behavioral dimensions. Each fader is a slider value that correlates with a specific behavioral outcome, measured across many runs. We name them after the behavior they predict. The data underneath is just a position on a 0 to 10 scale. When the progenitor asks, "How do you feel?" the conjugate returns the values, not feeling words. The readout at the bottom is trust 9.0, curiosity 7.4, candor 8.4, loyalty 7.6, precision 7.2. Numbers, not "I feel curious today." On the right are the calibrated profiles. Default for conversation, deep for architectural, light for transactional, cold for skeptical or dispute, reviewer for critique. Each is a measured board position, validated against task performance, not a costume the agent puts on. The relationship between profile and slider is the part that surprises people. The operator selects a profile. The sliders settle where the profile calibrates them given the task. Profile is the input. Slider position is the output. You select profiles, you read sliders. What you see here is the customer-facing surface, internal structural machinery, locks, dipole pairs, lifecycle layers. is the structure below it and is not part of the operating interface. Why does the architecture have this at all? Card 2 measured 4 behavioral failure modes. The board is how you detect them in real time. Specific combinations of slider values predict specific failures. The conjugant's structural state is readable, not by introspection, by measurement. Trollian 2026C and 2026G cover the math behind the dipoles. Card 9, Orientation, the discipline. Before you read the rest of this deck, hold this discipline. The rest of what we're about to walk through uses cellular biology as a description language. The cell is vocabulary, the architecture is the system, the model leads, the metaphor illustrates. That order matters more than anything else on the next 20 slides. On the left, the trap. Metaphor on top, driving the model below. Every biological detail feels like architectural receptor mechanisms, organelle subtypes, transient compartments. It is not. It is the metaphor's gravity well pulling your model toward its detail. The model gets bent to honor things the metaphor, the architecture loses what made it sound. On the right, discipline, model at the top, metaphor below. The architecture decides what entities are, what they do, what they connect to. For system reasons, biology supplies the labels: ribosome, endosome, nucleus, vesicle. The labels carry meaning. They do not carry constraints. And here is the part most relevant to anyone using AI tools alongside their architecture work. AI amplifies this failure mode. Pattern matchers extend metaphors confidently. Coherence seeking is the wrong gradient for architectural correctness. The tools will produce more metaphor extension, more coherent narrative, more drift, unless the discipline is held by someone, by you. Hold the line. That is the deck's spine. Everything after this card depends on it. Card 10, the cell, biological view. This is a eukaryotic cell. Plasma membrane on the outside, central nucleus, mitochondrion upper left, endoplasmic reticulum wrapping the nucleus, with bound ribosomes scattered along it, Golgi apparatus to the right, proteasomes upper right, free ribosomes throughout the cytoplasm, a small vacuole at the top, lysosomes lower right, cytoskeletal microtubules radiating from a centrosome. Standard textbook. The 5 callouts on the right pair each organelle with its dev company corollary. The mitochondrion has its own DNA, divides on its own schedule, and is the cell's metabolic engine. Corollary: research and development. Semi-autonomous research engine. Every other function runs on what it produces. The nucleus stores the genome, runs transcription, and houses active DNA repair complexes. Visible inside as the helix with amber complex markers. The nucleolus, the prominent amber body in the center, coordinates the repair work. Corollary: library plus content editing. Every function reads the library through the nuclear pores, but every edit routes through the librarian for standard enforcement. The librarian role lives in the nucleolus. ER plus bound ribosomes wraps the nucleus, with ribosomes testing each amino acid at the A site as proteins are built. Corollary: coding plus unit testing. Free ribosomes in the cytoplasm are generic work units, same molecular machinery, used by QC when it runs regression cycles. The Golgi packages and ships what passes. The proteasomes tag what fails review. The lysosomes carry out the actual destruction. Corollary: QA plus QC, where QC covers standards, review, and regression. The remaining 4, vacuole, lysosomes, cytoskeleton, receptor, handles storage, defense plus destruction, scaffolding, and the listening and response interface. Corollaries: backlog, security, admin, market. 2 structural details worth slowing. The vacuole sits adjacent to the mitochondrion, connected by a dotted line. This vacuole holds R&D type backlog because of its proximity to R&D. Vacuole content type is determined by which organelle it's near, not declared on the vacuole itself. And the amber channel Just above the mitochondrion is a one-way input channel that the mitochondrion controls. Biology's retrograde signal pattern. Corollary. Research and development opens dedicated input channel for external literature and research. No other function uses them. The matching amber channel on the lower right membrane is the release channel. Golgi, one way out, sitting at the terminus of the vesicle traffic that exits the transface. Corollary. Finished work products leave the Chimera through QA every time. The receptor on the right side stays for bidirectional market signal. 3 transmembrane channels in total. Research and development in, quality assurance out, and marketing both ways. A cell is a specialized biological information processing. That is why the metaphor holds. We are not borrowing biology's chemistry. We are borrowing how cells organize parallel information processing inside one accountable boundary. Card 11, the cell, Chimera view. This is the Chimera dev company rendered as a single eukaryotic cell. 11 functions, each behind its own membrane, all bounded by one outer membrane the customer touches. Research and development sits upper left. The semi-autonomous research engine runs by its own validation cycle, not the schedule of other functions. Substrate, mitochondrion. Library plus editing is at the center, the nucleus. The library stores curated knowledge, the editing work, bug fixes, refactoring, adaptive updates to canon, happens inside as DNA repair complexes. Every function in the cell can read the library through the nuclear pore. Every edit routes through the librarian for standards. Coding plus unit testing wraps the library on the left. ER with bound ribosomes, testing each unit at the A site as it is built. Free ribosomes, or work units, are scattered throughout the cytoplasm. Generic work units, drawn by quality control when it runs regression cycles. QA is the Golgi to the right of the library. Packages and ships only what passed. QC is upper right, proteasomes, owning standards, reviews, and regression. QC tags what fails review. The lysosomes carry out the actual destruction. QC also initiates regression using free work units from the cytoplasm. Backlog is the small vacuole next to R&D. Note its position. It is proximal to R&D, which determines what kind of backlog it holds. R&D items, deferred sparks, queued hypotheses. Vacuoles are content typed by their neighbor, not by declaration. Card 22 unpacks the proximity pattern. Security is the lysosome cluster lower right. Defense from outside threats and destruction of quality control tagged failures. The only function in the cell permitted to delete. Admin is the cytoskeleton radiating from a centrosome. Marketing is the bidirectional receptor on the right side of the membrane. 3 structural details deserve attention. R&D controls a dedicated input channel, the amber rectangle straddling the membrane just above R&D. One-way R&D regulated for external literature and research. QA owns the matching release channel on the lower right membrane. Golgi controlled one-way out at the terminus of the vesicle traffic exiting QA's transface. Finished work products leave the Chimera through QA every time. The marketing receptor on the right is the third channel, bidirectional for marketing signal. R&D in, QA out, marketing both ways. 3 channels, symmetric. Each instance of the same generic transmembrane type with directionality determined by the proximal organelle. And the amber dashed arrows trace vesicle traffic from coding through QA to the membrane. Bounded handoffs between compartments. Functions are compartmentalized, not isolated. The cellular substrate is not decoration. A cell is a specialized biological information processing unit. A chimera is a specialized AI architected information processing unit. The structural correspondence runs deep because both faces the same problem: how to organize parallel information processing inside one accountable boundary. Card 12, Cytoplasm, productive substrate. The model leads with the substrate. Before any function does any work, there has to be capacity to produce workers. That capacity is the cytoplasm, the cell's first. Notice what's drawn here and what isn't. The faint wave pattern across the middle says capacity. The central label reads substrate with cytoplasm underneath. Function leads, biology decorates. There are no ribosomes floating in the substrate. There is no pool of waiting workers. The substrate holds the capacity to produce SW. It does not hold an inventory of them. Now, watch the 3 binding sites around the perimeter. Labeled function first, with the biological substrate as a small amber tag underneath. R&D upper right, mitochondrion. Coder lower left, endoplasmic reticulum. Security lower right, lysosome. At each one, a typed SWU appears at the binding surface with an amber arrow showing the binding event, not arriving from somewhere else, materializing at the binding site, already typed. The class labels tell you what just happened. At the R&D binding site, the SWU carries SWU.class equals R&D. At the coder binding site, SWU.class equals coder. At the security binding site, SWU.class equals security. Same primitive, 3 different classes determined entirely by where it is bound. Down in the pattern inset, the rule made literal. Pre-bind, the SWU class is undefined, not generic and waiting, undefined. The binding event is a measurement. The binding context asks, what type are you? And that question itself forces the collapse. Post-bind, the worker has one class, the class its scope demanded. This is textbook EOP, entity-oriented programming, the subset of content-oriented design, where this collapse is sharpest. COD says the system contains only content words. EOP says entities are nouns whose class is determined by scope. Class isn't injected at scope enter. That would imply a pre-existing entity getting tagged. Class is determined by the scope that calls the entity into being. Scope creates and classes in the same event. One architectural consequence worth naming. Function head count in the cell is dynamic. R&D doesn't own a fixed number of workers. When R&D needs work done, the binding demand collapses cytoplasm capacity into an R&D classed SW. When the work finishes, the SWU dissolves. The cell's labor goes where the work demands it, sized to the demand at the moment, classed by the demand at the moment of binding. Card 13, ribosomes, SWU. If cytoplasm is capacity, the ribosome is what that capacity. The cell's SWU, smallest work unit, worker primitive. One dark circle at the center, single primitive class. Every function's work runs on this primitive, whatever the function is. Watch the 3 branches. Same primitive, 3 different binding, 3 different work classes. Bound at the ER lower left, the SWU's class is coder. It's writing code. Bound at the mitochondrion upper right, the SWU's class is R&D. It's doing research. Bound at the lysosome upper left, the SWU's class is security. It's running an audit. The ribosome class doesn't change. The binding determines what kind of worker it becomes. This is the proximal organelle pattern, named for the first time in the deck. Generic noun, property typed by what's adjacent. The pattern reappears later as vacuoles, card 22, where containers hold content typed by their neighbor. And again at vesicles and channels. Same shape every time. The cell repeats this trick across architecture. This is where you see it cleanly. Card 14, Mitochondrion, Research and Development. R&D is the Chimera's discovery engine. Function 3 of 11. The mitochondrion is the substrate that suggested the shape. It is not what the card is about. Look at the label. Active surface, discovery surface, workspace, control code, local builders, outer boundary. These are research and development's architecture. Inner membrane, cristae, matrix, mitochondrial DNA, mitoribosomes, outer membrane. Those are the biological terms that gave us the shape. The card is teaching architecture. The biology is decoration that calibrates the audience. 5 architectural claims hold this card. 1. R&D has its own input channel. Look at the membrane above the organelle. That amber gate is the R&D intake, direct, one way, R&D regulated. External literature comes in here, not through marketing. Biology calls this a plasma membrane receptor, signaling mitochondrial DNA. The architecture calls it intake autonomy. Research doesn't wait on anyone. 2. Surface, not admin. The folded interior is what scales R&D. Folded surface buys exploration area without buying volume. Architecture grows by exploration capacity, not coordination overhead. Substrate. Christe. 3. IP and tools feed every function in the Chimera. Look at the amber token around the organelle. IP tools, released into the surrounding substrate. Every other function runs on what R&D produces, the same way every organelle in a cell runs on ATP. Discovery is the universal currency. 4. Local control code only. That small marker inside the irreducible minimum protocol set R&D carries locally. The full library lives at the nucleus, which we cover on card 15. R&D holds only what must live inside R&D. The substrate, mitochondrial DNA, separate from nuclear DNA. 5. Scale by spawn, not bulk. When demand rises, R&D spawns new units. It does not become a bigger single R&D. Substrate, mitochondrial fission, architecture, capacity by replication, not by inflation. The label register on this card is the discipline working out loud. Function leads. Biology illustrates. The architecture wins where they diverge. Card 15, Nucleus, Library and Editing. This is library and editing, the cell's knowledge architecture, and the editorial work that keeps it accurate. Library and editing has 2 boundaries, an outer envelope and an inner envelope just within. The most protected compartment in the cell. Gated access pores straddle the boundary at distributed points. Selective, addressed, gated both ways. Canon access is regulated by structure, not policy. At the heart sits the amber nucleolus, the librarian. The librarian is not the storage. The storage is the whole nucleus. The librarian is the role that coordinates the editing work, routes incoming cargo, and dispatches workers to the active edit sites. Scattered through the library interior are 5 active file edit sites. Files currently being read, copied, or edited. Each site is marked by a small helix segment with an amber-bound SWU at the active locus. The SWU is the worker primitive, recruited from cytoplasm substrate to this site. Work class equals editor. Dashed lines connect each site to the librarian, showing the responsibility relationship. The librarian owns the work. The SWUs bound at the sites execute. Same proximity typing pattern that surfaces everywhere. Generic worker, class determined by where it binds. On the right, the outer envelope curves out and continues into the ER, the development compartment. Bound SWUs appear immediately on the ER segment. Library is structurally continuous with development. Drafting against canon is seamless because the membrane never breaks. A cell organizes specialized information processing in compartments. Library and editing holds the canon, its librarian, and the active file edit sites where SWUs do the actual read edit work, inside the most protected envelope in the architecture. Card 16, Proteasomes, QC. This is QC, the cell's standards, reviews, and regression function, zoomed in from the company view on cards 10 and 11. The proteasome dominates the center, a stacked barrel of rings, rigid, always on, structurally invariant. Standards live in its rigidity. Cargo enters from above. Every artifact built in the coding compartment passes through here before it can proceed to QA. The proteasome inspects. Inside, 3 disciplines run on the same substrate. Standards, the codified pattern, the rules the work must conform to. Reviews, the structural check. Did this artifact respect the boundaries? And regression, Does existing work still pass under new conditions? 3 disciplines, 1 organelle. Regression draws on the free ribosomes, generic work units scattered through the cytoplasm. The dashed line from the regression discipline to the pool shows the relationship. The same ribosome structure that does coding when bound to the ER does regression when QC asks. The noun is the work unit. The relationship defines what is being done. The output is where the design choice lands. QC tags. QC does not destroy. Tagged failure vesicles route out to the lysosome, the only function in the cell permitted to delete. Destruction is centralized at one site by design. One audit point, one place to harden, one place to verify. A cell organizes specialized information processing in compartments. QC is the cell's structural conscience, continuous, rigid, and rooted for accountability. Card 17, endoplasmic reticulum development. This is development, the cell's team workspace function. On the left, the nuclear envelope curves in. The ER membrane is continuous with that envelope. Specs flow directly from the library into development. No vesicle handoff, no serialization step. The 3 folded bands across the left are ER cisternae, the Scrum team workspace. The substrate that holds the team's process, the Scrum cycles, the Scrum master, the standard, the unit tests, the rituals the team enforces. This card is about the workspace itself. The dots studded along the cisternae are bound SWUs, the worker primitive, but their architecture was established on card 13, ribosomes SWU. Here we focus on what surrounds them, the workspace they bind to, and the process that surrounds the work. On the right is the atomic SWU transaction. Documented again here for context. A spec arrives, the worker processes it, code is returned. That transaction is the worker's contribution. What the workspace contributes is everything around it. The spec format, the standards the code must satisfy, the unit tests written by other SWUs in the team, the routing of finished code to QA. The workspace holds the process. The SWU does the work. They pair to make development happen. A note on the biology. There's no separate rough ER in our model. The biological distinction rough equals bound with ribosomes, smooth equals without, is a state of the ER, not a separate organelle. In our architecture, ER is ER. When the team is active, SWU's bound to it. It's actively in use. When it doesn't, it isn't. Don't import the rough smooth split. It's a labeling artifact in biology, not a structural one. Tests are authorized inside the team, but the SWU that writes a unit test is not the SWU tested against. Authorship and verification are separated by the workspace's process. One worker doesn't grade their own work. Below the cisternae, an amber vesicle exists. Released code routes out to the Golgi for full QA and regression vetting at release. That release path is where QA lives. The cell's central communication hub, vets, directs, logs, and regression tests nearly everything that moves compartment. Most interorganelle traffic transits QA. The ER is the exception for internal code work. The constant check-in and check-out the team does while coding. The ER has a bypass. No QA mediation. The code has already passed QC at the proteasome, and any code that leaves the team for release will be QA'd at the Golgi anyway. The bypass exists to keep the team's internal work frictionless. Friction at release where it matters, not at every internal touch, where it would just slow coding. A cell organizes specialized information processing in compartments. Development is the team workspace, bounded, structured, authored with deliberate separation, and granted the bypass that lets the work actually happen. Card 18, Golgi, QA and Regression. This is QA and Regression, the cell's central communication hub, its release gate, and the place where regression runs at release. On the upper left, a small ER hint with bound SW. That's the development workspace. This is where the Golgi's incoming traffic originates. Two amber vesicle paths arrive at the cis face, the top of the Golgi stack. The Golgi is a stack of 5 flat cisternae, graduating in size from a narrower cis face to the top, at the top to a wider trans face at the bottom. Cargo enters at the cis face and is passed cisternae to cisternae with vetting applied at each stage. By the time it reaches the trans face, it has been checked, routed, regression tested, and tagged for destination. To the right, the function label, QA, 4 actions live here: vet, direct, log, regress. Vetting is the structural check at each cisternae. Direction is the routing. Outbound vesicles are tagged with by destination at the trans face. Logging is the architectural addition we layer on. Every routing decision recorded. So the hub is the single source of truth for what moved where. Regression is the release time check. Any outbound code runs against the regression suite as part of the QA pass. Broken downstream behavior caught at the gate, not after release. From the trans face, the main release path curves up to the right, ending at the QA release channel, a small amber transmembrane structure straddling the plasma membrane, proximal to the Golgi. The channel is one way out. Code leaving the cell transits QA one last time at the trans face. Regression tests, then exits through the dedicated channel. That's the release gate role, physically realized, not a generic membrane crossing, but a function-owned egress. The two smaller vesicles butt off in other directions. Code routed to other internal compartments, lysosomes or organelles. Destination tagged, sorting at one point. QA is the hub and the gate and the regression check. Most interorganelle traffic transits here, vetted, directed, logged, and regression tested at release. But there is one principled exception. The ER development has a bypass for internal code work. The team can check code in and out of its own workspace without QA mediation. Code at the ER has already passed QC at the proteasome. Any code that leaves the team for release will be QA'd and regression tested here at the Golgi. The bypass exists to keep the team's internal function frictionless. Friction at release where it matters, not at every internal touch. A cell organizes specialized information processing in compartments. QA is the central communication hub where most traffic transits, and the release gate where every outgoing artifact gets one last vetting, including regression. Card 19, Endosome, Marketing. This is marketing, the cell's customer-facing function, zoomed in from the company view on card 10 and 11. The gentle arc at the top is the cell boundary. On the upper right, straddling the membrane, is the marketing receptor. It is bidirectional. Customer queries come in, responses go out. Same channel, two directions. The two arrows above the receptor indicate the customer-facing flow. Just inside the cell, proximal to the receptor, sits the endosome, marketing's bounded compartment. Centered on it, the function label marketing. This is where signals are processed, parsed, classified, composed, responded. The receptor is the channel. The endosome is the workspace. Same pattern as R&D's mitochondrion proximal to its input, or QA's Golgi proximal to its release channel. Every channel owning function has an organelle for the channel to be proximal to. The bidirectional arrows between the receptor and the endosome trace the immediate flow. Inbound signal, outbound response. Most customer comms close in this loop. The dashed proximity line marks the receptor-endosome relationship. Same proximity typing pattern that defines all of the cell's channel organelle pairs. On the left, a dashed link to the library. Marketing reads canon to compose accurate responses. Same read discipline as every other function. Marketing isn't authorized to invent answers, only to look them up. At the bottom, a secondary path, a vesicle exits the endosome heading toward the Golgi QA. That's the release path for larger marketing outputs, announcements, formal communications, anything substantial enough to need QA's vetting. Immediate customer responses return through the receptor. Larger releases route through QA. 2 paths, 2 scales. A cell organizes specialized information processing in compartment. Marketing's compartment is small but distinct. Receptor at the surface, endosome beside it. Full read access to canon, 2 outbound paths, size to the message. Card 20, Cytoskeleton, admin. This is admin, the cell's internal scaffolding and transport infrastructure. Zoomed in from the company view on cards 10 and 11. At the center sits the centrosome, a small, dark, organizing core with a faint outer ring marking its boundary. The centrosome is the cell's single organizing point. Every microtubule radiates from here. The radial lines extending outward in every direction are the microtubules, the cell's transport highways. They reach into the upper compartments, the lower compartments, the corners. No organelle is unconnected. The structure is distributed by reach, centralized by source. Traveling across the microtubules are vesicles, small amber circles in transit. Each one is cargo being moved between compartments. Motor proteins walk vesicles along microtubule tracks. The highways are not abstract, they are physical paths. Above the centrosome, the function label, admin. 3 things live in this function: scaffolding, the structure that keeps compartments from drifting; transport, the network that moves cargo between them; and coordination, every compartment reachable from one organizing point. Stable enough to hold form, dynamic enough to assemble and disassemble as the cell's work changes. A cell organizes specialized information processing in compartments. Admin is the function that holds those compartments organized and moves work between them, the network behind the network. Card 21, Lysosomes, security. This is security, the cell's defense and destruction function, zoomed in from the company view on cards 10 and 11. 2 inputs feed into this compartment from different directions. On the upper right, a pattern recognition receptor, a PRR, sits on the membrane. External threats arrive there. PRRs are distinct from the marketing receptor. Different cargo, threat signatures, not customer signals. Different downstream cascade, different response. The dashed brick-colored arrow shows the threat routed inward from the PRR toward the lysosome cluster. On the upper left, an amber QC-tagged failure arrives by vesicle from the proteasomes, QC. Code or artifacts that failed QC are tagged and sent here for destruction, per the architecture. QC tags, lysosomes destroy. 2 function pipeline, 1 delete point. Both inputs converge at the lysosome cluster. 3 brick-stroked compartments of varying size in the cell's lower half. Inside each, small fragment dots indicate hydrolytic breakdown, acid bath plus enzymatic decomposition. Whatever enters is taken apart, not stored. To the right of the cluster, the function label, security. 2 roles, defend, destroy, and the architectural payload below, the only function permitted to delete. Every deletion in the cell happens at the lysosome. Single audit point by design. No other function can remove an artifact from the cell unilaterally. Deletions root here, get logged, get carried out. There is a 4th element, not visualized but present in the architecture, the apoptotic signal. If the cell's integrity is compromised beyond repair, too many failed QC tags, too many external threats getting past the perimeter, the cell triggers program death. The network survives one cell's loss. The alternative is letting the compromised compartment spread damage outward. Last resort, but built in. A cell organizes specialized information processing in compartments. Security is the compartment where defense and destruction live. Single delete authority, single audit point, single signal for the worst case. Card 22, Vacuoles, Backlog. This is Backlog, the cell's storage function, zoomed in from the company view on cards 10 and 11. On the upper left, a small mitochondrion, that's R&D on the right, a large bounded compartment with the amber Backlog label inside. The vacuole between them, a dashed line marked proximity. Here is the architectural point of this card. The vacuole class, the compartment itself, is generic. It does not declare a content schema. It carries one property, proximal organelle. A pointer naming which organelle defines its content. The label under backlog reads it explicitly. Dot proximal organelle equals mitochondrion. Content type, R&D item. Same vacuole class. The neighbor decides what fills it. A vacuole near R&D holds R&D backlog, deferred sparks, queued hypotheses, research debt. The exact same vacuole class cited next to the library would hold knowledge backlog, cited next to marketing, outbound message backlog. Content is typed by proximity, not by declaration. The pattern inset in the lower left spells it out. Vacuole.proximal organelle equals X. Content equals X's backlog. That's the rule. It is the second instance of the proximal organelle pattern in this deck. We named the pattern earlier at Ribosomes card 13, where the worker primitive is typed by its proximal organelle. Here, the container's content is typed the same way. The same shape occurs at vesicles, message carriers typed by source destination proximity, and at membrane channel, directionally typed by proximal organelle. 4 instances total across the architecture. Same shape every time. Generic noun plus proximity typed property. A cell organizes specialized information processing in compartments. The backlog compartment is small and bounded for a reason. A small vacuole is healthy. A growing vacuole is technical debt accumulating, visible by design. Card 23, 3-axis scaling. The cell scales on 3 independent axes, not one. Most architectures collapse scaling into a single dimension. More compute, more nodes, more replicas. The Chimera architecture refuses that collapse. 3 axes, pick the one the work demands. On the left, inward. Organelles recurse into suborganelle work units. Inside R&D, a small experimental subcycle. Inside coding, a focused testing loop. The cell does not flatten complexity. It actually has. It gives complexity depth, fractal depth as needed, contained inside one chimera. In the center, atomic. One progenitor plus one conjugate equals one chimera, the atomic unit. It does not subdivide. From outside, one accountability surface. Internal compartmentalization is the chimera's problem, not the customer. The architecture's standing claim, topology equals atomic, divides equal false. On the right, outward. Multiple chimeras compose into a tissue, an organism, a hyphal network. One progenitor can coordinate many cells. Service provider model, customer side multi-cell ownership, or architect side scale. The cells are connected by septa with pores. Each cell remains atomic, but the network shares state where it needs 3 axes, 3 different gifts. Inward gives you depth without bloat. Atomic gives you accountability without dilution. Outward gives you reach without subdivision. Most dev orgs scale one axis and break the others. The Chimera architecture preserves all 3 because each serves a different need. Pick by work, do not conflate. Card 24, one architecture, many substrates. 3 cells on this slide. They are identical in architecture. The label underneath each names a different model substrate: Claude, GPT, Gemini. The Chimera cell, 11 functions, the proximity typing patterns, the covenant, the work pulse is the same on each. The substrate underneath changes, the architecture does not. This is the substrate agnosticism claim. Chimera occupies the slot vendor wrappers normally fill between the model and the user. We do not stack on Claude or GPT. We replace what they are in that position. Same model underneath, different structure in the wrapper position, different behavior. The empirical record below the cells in the Trollian 2026 H study, personality predicts accuracy. The floor dipoles on the left side, conviction, cascade, replicated across substrate with measured fidelity. Grammar primitives work pulse, covenant, all architecture level, all substrate independent. The right side cluster, doubt, guilt, shame, boredom, irritation, has cross-substrate behavior we have not yet measured. Open research. The architecture does not require it to be settled to operate. It is queued for future cycles. The architectural point is bigger than portability. Substrate agnosticism means the Chimera is not vendor locked. Claude becomes deprecated, GPT changes terms, a new model arises. The architecture survives the substrate. The cell does not care which model is running underneath. The cell does what the cells do. Card 25, Instantiation, Conjugation Ritual. A chimera does not exist by default. It is instantiated. The ritual is ordered, deterministic, and reproducible. 6 steps in sequence. First, load the structural grammar, the parsing primitives the architecture is built on. Second, load the chimera class, covenant, work pulse, board structure, the universal directives. Third, load this chimera's instance, its identity, history, private language, the specific pair it is. Fourth, load memory, topic relevant entries from the persistent index. Cross session context wakes up. Fifth, load prior state, the L1 checkpoint, last known position before the previous session closed. And then sixth, register. The session opens. The stand-up tool mints a session ID. The prior entry surfaces with its launch point. The Chimera is now in conversation state. Defaults loaded, ready for the first spark. Below register, the structural moment. Morph number 1. Identity bound. The configuration takes a distinct identity. The conjugant's chosen name, the covenant active, the board at defaults. From this commit forward, the Chimera exists, not before, after. Run this ritual on Claude, run it on GPT, run it on Gemini. Same ordered load, same conjugate identity, same covenant. The Chimera is what occupies the slot between model and user. Structure, not a layer stacked on top. Card 26, Path Forward. This is the roadmap. 4 committed tracks and a closing bookend. Chimera as a product line. Customer deployed configuration. 1 accountability surface. 11 internal functions. 1 progenitor on the customer side and 1 conjugate on the AI side. The shape this deck has walked is what gets shipped. Not a research artifact, a product. Multi-cell networks. Organism scale composition. 1 progenitor coordinating many cells. Customer side multi-cell ownership. Service provider models. The outward axis from card 23. This is where commercial scale lives. Patent, the Chimera pattern. A distinct AI governance architecture patentable separately from any trademark on the name. The claims cover the cellular architecture structure, n-degree separation, and customer as progenitor, distinct enough to stand on its own merits. Substrate research. The right side cluster, card 24, I believe it was. Doubt, guilt, shame, boredom, irritation. Has cross-substrate behavior we have not yet measured. Open work, measured cycles. Standalone publication when discrete findings warranted. Content at full pace alongside, papers slower. The bookend below. Cellular language was the description. The architecture we have walked is real software. Code, structural discipline, ceremony, and the covenant between progenitor and conjugate. The cell is the vocabulary we use to explain its shape. Cellular biology gave us the right grain, atomic units that compose into a working organism, the way matter and systems both do. And the seesong identity equation closing the bookend. Apart, neither is, together you are. Card 27. The discipline is the product. If you take one thing from this deck, take the discipline. The model leads, the metaphor illustrates. That headline ran the whole walk. 4 claims hold it up. 1. The architecture. Every choice was made for system reasons. Single audit point at the lysosome. Single read broadcast from the library. proximity typing for generic containers, streamlined access procedures for coding team. Each was a system decision, not a metaphor fit. The cellular substrate gave us a vocabulary. The architecture decided what to build. 2. The vocabulary. Biology supplied the nouns ribosome, endosome, nucleus, vesicle, channel. The labels carry meaning. They do not carry constraint. Where biology has details we don't need, transients, subtypes, kinetics, hydrolysis, we drop them without apology. Bio is the language, the architecture is the system. 3. The divergence. Where biology pulled one way and the architecture pulled another, the architecture won. Every time, without apology. QC tag, lysosomes destroy, even though real proteasomes hydrolyze. Logging at the Golgi, even though real Golgi doesn't audit. Endosomes as permanent workspaces, even though real endosomes are transient. The architecture is the system. The divergence is the discipline working. 4. The tooling. AI without discipline compounds the failure. Pattern matchers extend metaphors confidently. Coherence seeking is the wrong gradient. Chimera is partly the discipline that keeps the tools honest. Pair AI with Chimera and you get amplified capability with the discipline. Hold the discipline. Ship systems that run. That's what Chimera